Hi friends, I'm going to read you guys this book. Some of you guys may have heard of this. It's also a movie on Netflix, so some of you might have watched this. It's called The Legend of Spookley, the Square Pumpkin. And it's written by Joe Troiano and illustrated by Susan Banta. Now before we read, I got a couple questions. What is this part of the book called? The front cover, right? And what's this called? The back cover, and this is the spine. Okay, so right here on the front cover, you see the different parts. There's the three things we need, right? The title, the picture, and the author's name, right? We have to have those things on the front cover of our book. When we write books as writers, we make sure those are on there. And do you see how this author's got all those things? Yeah, and you know what? Even the other books we've read, like Splat, it's got the same three things on there. Okay, so Spookley the Square Pumpkin. Let's read to find out what happens with Spookley. One day in the pumpkin patch, the strangest little pumpkin hatched. Spookley wasn't like his friends, where they had curves. He had ends. Spookley was different. He was odd. He was rare. Spookley the pumpkin wasn't round. He was square. Sam? While the round pumpkins had fun rolling around, poor Spookley sat there shaped all wrong. He tried and tried with all his might, but he couldn't budge. He just sat tight. The other pumpkins teased him because he was square. Spookley wished he was round and he could roll everywhere. That is, until one night when they all discovered it's fine to be round when the weather is fair, but there are times when it's better to be square. So it says there's times where it's better to be a square pumpkin rather than a round pumpkin, and let's see what happens and why they feel that way. Halloween was just a day away when a mighty storm blew across the bay. It tossed the round pumpkins to and fro. It snapped their vines, then off they'd go, bouncing left and slamming right, banging, bashing. What a sight! Spookley sat there filled with fright, but glad to be a square that night. Did you hear that? So what happened to all these round pumpkins? They were banging and splashing all around because there was a storm that came in, and it was so windy the pumpkins were banging into each other. But did Spookley have that problem? No, because he was square. He can't roll, can he? Let's keep reading. Suddenly, the fence gave way. 3 pumpkins rolled out into the bay. Spookley knew what must be done. It was up to him. He was the one. He teetered, he tottered, he tipped, he tried, and finally flipped, but was on his side. Again he tipped, and again he flopped, again he flipped, and then he stopped. Right in the gap where the fence had snapped. He blocked the way. The hole was capped. All the pumpkins shouted, "Hooray!" Spookley the Square Pumpkin had saved the day. Then a pumpkin hit him with a whack. He thought his shell would start to crack. Then another one hit him with a thump, and another with a smack. Then one by one, a ton of pumpkins piled up on the stack, with a bang and a bash and a crunch and a crash, and then it all went black. There's Spookley down here, blocking the hole in the fence, and all these pumpkins blew over and they're laying on him in a pile. At dawn, when the storm had stopped, the farmer came out and checked his crop. He picked his pumpkins up one by one and laid them out in the warm, dry sun. And when the last was moved away, the farmer could see what had saved the day. An odd-shaped pumpkin, short and dense, was wedged against the broken fence. Its shell was bruised, its stem was too, but there was a brave little Spookley sitting straight, strong, and true. Right then and there, the farmer knew of all the seeds he'd ever sown, Spookleys were the most special that he'd ever grown. And the next year, when it was time to sow, he sowed those seeds in every row. He watered and weeded and watched them grow. And oh, that morning about mid-June, when the pumpkin patch began to bloom, there were tiny pumpkins everywhere, hundreds and hundreds, most of them square. Look at this pumpkin patch. Some were cubes and some rectangular. Some were flat and others triangular. There was a bed of bright red ones and 2 rows of blue. There were polka dot pumpkins and rainbow ones too. There were thousands of colors and hundreds of shapes. Oh, what a garden variety makes. Now every year on Halloween, Spookley's patch is quite a scene. People come from far and near to see what wonders grow that year. They stop, they gawk, they gaze, they stare. Then they pick a pumpkin that's round, triangular, or perfectly square. See all the different pumpkins? Those all came from Spookley. They used his seeds to sow the pumpkin patch that next year. Now you know the story of how Spookley grew. Maybe someday you'll tell someone too. And they'll go tell someone who will go tell another. And maybe one day we will all discover that you can't judge a book or a pumpkin by its cover. All right, boys and girls, so the very end of this story, they had a really good message. The author said, you can't judge a book or a pumpkin by its cover. And do you know what that means? That means that you can't just look at the cover of a book and decide if it's going to be a good story. Sometimes you have to open it up and read it to know if you're going to enjoy it or not, right? Same thing with that pumpkin. At the very beginning of this story, when they saw Spookley, the square pumpkin, what did all the other pumpkins do? They made fun of him, didn't they? They made fun of him because of the way he looked. He was square and they were round, and they thought that he was weird because he didn't look like them, so they made fun of him. But then he ended up saving the day, didn't he? Because it's not about what he looks like that's important. It's about what's inside. And that's what the author means when he says, you can't judge a book or a pumpkin by its cover. It's not about what you look like on the outside, friends. It's about what's inside, okay? And that goes for a book, and that goes for the Spookley the Square Pumpkin, and that even goes for you guys. All right, boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed this book. And if you have Netflix, you can watch this video on there. And if not, that's okay, because it's just like the book. Bye, friends.